Hello there, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our special coverage of the Russia-Ukraine file with me, Karim Fazakri, coming to you live on All 24 News from Algiers. Fighting has intensified around Ukraine's capital while Russian forces bombard cities across the country. Russian troops have redeployed off the main road north of Kiev, moving into towns and forests as Ukrainian defenders have thwarted their attempts to move south with air and ground attacks. Ukraine's authorities accused Russia of preventing the evacuation of people from the heavily besieged port city of Mariupol in the south of the country. Conditions in the city are dire, with civilians trapped there. Food, water, and electricity are scarce, according to reports by Ukrainian media. Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelensky said at Saturday news conference that about 1,300 Ukrainian soldiers have been killed since Russia's military operation began. The Kremlin escalated its threats to the West as well, speaking to Russia's state-controlled media on Saturday. Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov warned that Western convoys shipping weapons to Ukraine's defenders are legitimate targets. What could change this dynamic and increase the probability that Russia would prefer a ceasefire to continuing the war? Ukraine and the West could decide to send clearer signals to Putin that a withdrawal from Ukraine as part of a negotiated agreement is less costly to him than a further escalation of the war. This strategy would require the Ukrainian people to be willing to make more enormous sacrifices on the battlefield to raise the cost of the invasion to Russia. More on this will be discussed with our panel of guests via Skype. We have OLEXIY HARAN, Professor of Comparative Politics from Kiev, MOHYLA University. Thank you for joining us, Professor. And Don McLean, GILL, geopolitical analyst in Indo-Pacific geopolitics from the Philippines. Thank you for joining us. The discussion begins right after this break. Welcome again, dear viewers and our honored guests. Before we delve into discussion, let me share with you a reminder of the latest updates on the ground. 9 people have been killed in Lviv after airstrikes at a NATO-linked base close to Ukraine's border with Poland. Ukrainian President Zelensky warns invaders are trying to turn Kherson into a breakaway region. People in Kiev are scrambling to escape with the bulk of Russian ground forces about 25 kilometers from the center of the Ukrainian capital. Mayor of Mariupol says 12 days of Russian bombardment have killed 1,500 people in the besieged port city as shelling continues. The United States has said it would rush up to $200 million in additional small arms, anti-tank and anti-aircraft weapons to Ukraine. Russia has said its troops could target supplies of Western weapons in Ukraine. And before we go into the questions, let me introduce this intro clip by by Vladimir Zelensky, who said that Russia is trying to create new pseudo-republics in Ukraine to break his country apart. President Volodymyr Zelensky said in his nightly address to the nation Saturday, Zelensky called on Ukraine's regions, including Kherson, which was captured by Russian forces, not to repeat the experience of Donetsk and Luhansk. Pro-Russian separatists beginning fighting Ukraine forces in those eastern regions in 2014. Let's take a listen.
The occupiers from Kherson region are trying to repeat the sad experience of forming pseudo-republics. Local officials are blackmailed, legislators are pressured. They are looking for someone to bribe to organize the so-called KPR, Kherson People's Republic. Following the attack on our country, Ukraine, the Russian leadership is transforming its region into something similar to the so-called DPR and LPR, into a vast area isolated from the rest of the world, where poverty will reign, where everything will be determined only by violence, and where people will flee from.
I begin with you, Professor OLEXIY HARAN. Russia recognized the Donetsk people Republic and the Luhansk People's Republic before it started its special military operation, as it prefers to call it, in Ukraine in February. Moscow said it had to protect the separatist regions and is demanding that Ukraine recognize their independence too. Will Ukraine stand this test?
Correct something.
Professor OLEXIY HARAN, can you hear me?
Yes. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So first of all, Russian forces striked not a NATO link base. No, it's not a NATO link base. It's a peacekeepers center. This is a different. Secondly, our president's name is not Vladimir, which is Russian. He is Volodymyr. Volodymyr, please care about that. Now, regarding so-called separatists, forget about so-called separatists. Now in Ukraine, there's a huge support for President Zelensky and for the unity of the country. 93%. 93%. What Russia created in 2014 during its first attack on Ukraine, they called it separatist regions, but in fact these regions were occupied by the Russian regular army. Since 2014, they are fully controlled by Russian regular army. So please do not refer to separatists. It's totally the region which is controlled. By the way, you are showing now the map, which is wrong because it shows the whole Donbass in red, which is not correct. Even Russian regular forces controls only 1/3 of Donbass. 2/3 of Donbass are under Ukrainian control. So please correct the map which you have already shown. Again, don't use this term separatists. There are no separatists. There is Russian regular army which is fighting war against Ukraine with bloodshed of civilian people.
Your point is clear. Even though a negotiated agreement is very likely or very unlikely at this point, there could be developments that might indicate a dynamic toward a real ceasefire and potentially a comprehensive deal. Since the beginning of this military operation, the parties have had conflicting short-term interests after Putin decided to use force in a way deemed by the UN General Assembly to be aggression against Ukraine in violation of the United Nations Charter and with disregard for civilians' lives, homes, and infrastructure. Ukraine has been highly interested in a cessation of hostilities. Ukrainians know that an escalating war ultimately threatens their survival as a people and the existence of their country as an independent state. However, for Putin, a ceasefire is neither a core interest nor an urgent matter at this moment. For a genuine negotiation to begin, the interest in a ceasefire must be shared, even if the gap in urgency between the parties may remain. What's your take on this, Mr. Don McLean Gill?
Thank you so much for having me. And of course, I thank the presence of the professor who has joined us for this particular discussion. Now, this is of great importance. As we know, there's no justification to the lives lost, the brave Ukrainians who have lost their lives at the expense of these unfolding issues. Now, we have understood that there was a major development, particularly in Turkey, in order to hold high-level negotiations from the Russian and Ukrainian sides. However, as both sides have expressed, the situation has not really evolved into something effective or positive. Now we can see that there's an initiative to resume high-level negotiations between Russia and Ukraine, particularly in Israel. Now we have to understand that the situation is very tense as of the moment, and of course the lives that are being lost comes at the expense of the Ukrainians as well, and the need to have a conducive environment to be able to negotiate, to be able to discuss is necessary. I feel that those sanctions are in place, though providing military aid is important for the security of the Ukrainians. But the problem is that as we prolong the situation using these methods, these comes to the expense of the Ukrainians, the brave Ukrainians who are fighting to defend their territory. And on top of that, if I may add a last point, It's not enough to provide these military aid and these sanctions, because as we can see, the millions of Ukrainians that have fled Ukraine for safe haven, they are not also being treated effectively and properly. As we can see, the temporary protection is also needs to be reflected on. And the United Kingdom, for example, the hardline policy against Ukrainian refugees is also worrisome. So we have to look at it holistically to be able to address the issue at hand.
Very nice. Speaking of the escalation, the humanitarian situation in Ukraine is deteriorating quickly and has become catastrophic in a number of cities, according to the Russian military. And in some cities, it has reached a catastrophic proportions. Let's have a listen.
The situation in Ukraine, unfortunately, continues to deteriorate rapidly in some cities. It has reached catastrophic proportion. Armed formations of nationalists are mining residential areas, destroying bridges and roads, and destroying survival facilities. As a result of these criminal and treacherous actions by the Ukrainian authorities, mainly towards their own people, the civilian population is forced to survive in inhuman conditions, without heat, without electricity, without water supply, without food or medication. The most serious humanitarian situation has developed in Mariupol. Hundreds of thousands of people, including foreigners, are forcibly detained by nationalists who, threatening physical violence, stop any attempt to leave the city.
Just recently, $500 million of aid was announced for Ukraine, but nothing is changing on the ground. Isn't Ukraine getting the necessary aid, as it is reported from media? Professor OLEXIY, HARAN, what's your take in this?
Yeah, first of all, let me stress again. You are showing now two maps. One map is correct. On the other map, this map is correct, but the second map which you show is incorrect because it depicts the whole Donbass in red. And again, let me stress you, it's not the case. This map which you show right now with Donbass, the whole Donbass in red, is not correct. So I would urge you to remove it, basically.
Okay, we'll double check on that. Thank you for the info.
Regarding the Western support, yeah, we have now, first of all, huge economic sanctions. Finally, I would say the sanctions are belated because we Ukrainians were demanding it since 2014. If the sanctions were introduced previously, perhaps there would be no this bloody war. But better late than never. So now economic sanctions are more or less okay, but they should be expanded because not all Russian banks, for example, are disconnected from SWIFT. The largest Russian bank, Sberbank, is not disconnected from SWIFT. This is because of Germany. Regarding military support, yes, we have a lot of support which help us to defend the situation on the ground. On the ground, Ukrainians, oh, once again, you're showing the wrong map. Do they hear me in studio?
Yes,
Isn't
we
it
can
so
hear you. We can tell the
it,
technical team to remove the map. We understand. We can rectify that later.
Okay. And regarding, so on the grounds, Ukrainian troops are very, very effective. By the way, I'm sitting in Kiev. Actually 20 kilometers from the front line.
Okay.
And so I basically understand the situation. But
very nice. Can you tell us about the humanitarian aid? Like, is it getting to Kiev? Is it getting to the people who need this so badly?
Yeah, but let me finish with the previous one, because what we need no-flight zone over Ukraine. Okay, NATO is not going to introduce it because they are afraid of war with Russia. But at least give us jets and give us air defense system. This is very, very important because otherwise you will continue this shelling of innocent civilians. And regarding what Russian general said, this is so cynical. Frankly, I don't understand why you put it on the air. Basically, he is accusing Ukrainians of bombarding their own city.
We're trying to stay neutral, sir, and try to present the point of view of both parts here.
Yeah,
That's our job as
look,
journalists.
Look, when you have cynical, when you have Nazi-type propaganda. So look, you are quoting this Russian general with no rebuffing him. So this is really crazy. It's Goebbels-type propaganda, what he is saying. Regarding humanitarian support, unfortunately, Russians prevent humanitarian corridors. For example, to Mariupol, for several days we cannot move humanitarian convoy, and Russians are preventing evacuation of the people from Mariupol. There are 400,000 civilians in Mariupol which are blocked. 1,050 civilians have already died in Mariupol.
Very nice. What can the world do better to help Ukraine? It seems that Ukrainian people and government are disappointed and nothing really helpful on the ground. Mr. Don McLean, Jill, do you have any comments on what our guest has just stated?
Absolutely. The situation is, as we all know, the unfolding situation comes at the expense of innocent lives. And I'd like to go on further with what I discussed earlier about, of course, our focus now will be to create a sustainable environment for the people of Ukraine who are leaving the country in millions for that particular matter. So let me touch on this particular issue real quick. Again, as I have mentioned, the EU members have provided a temporary protection. So here's the good thing, here's the bad thing. The good thing is that, yes, the European countries, the members of the EU, especially bordering Ukraine, have done this quite rapidly in order to accommodate the Ukrainians who are fleeing from the terrors that are happening in Ukraine. And this is based, of course, on a 2001 temporary protection directive. Now, as we can see, the problem with this is when we talk about temporary protection, the question here is when will it end? We have seen certain situations that have occurred since 2001 where other states have incorporated this particular situation. And the problem with this is the ambiguity for the Ukrainians. And this is indeed terrifying for the midterm and long term. And the need to recalibrate this approach to be able to address the humanitarian casualties is necessary. My last point, which leads back to the United Kingdom, for example, we have known that the UK has indeed issued a number of hardline policies in the past for refugees. And the question is, why should we politicize such an issue right now, given, of course, the situation is very catastrophic? The UK, in fact, said that it's willing to speed up family reunification, but does not really explicitly mention the refugee status, which is also problematic. So if we want to create a conducive environment for the sustainability of the people, which is, of course, the primary situation that we all have to take into consideration, these environmental policies need to be recalibrated as well. We understand that NATO would not be willing to put their boots on the ground. That's fine. That is their prerogative at the expense. But we have to create what we can do for this particular time being is to create more recalibrated policies to accommodate the situation at hand. And currently, they are not enough. See, military aid is fine to defend the territorial integrity of Ukraine. But if we talk about human security, then I feel that this situation is quite lacking as of the moment.
Very nice indeed. The UN said Saturday that the number of refugees fleeing Ukraine since the Russian military operation 2 weeks ago is now nearly 2.6 million. In the latest update on Saturday afternoon, the UN High Commissioner for Refugees said there were over 2.5 million refugees who had fled Ukraine so far. And an estimation by the UN Refugee Agency predicts that 4 million people could leave Ukraine, a figure which will likely be revised upwards. Back to you, Professor OLEXIY HARAN. The Russian-Ukraine crisis has triggered Europe's biggest refugee crisis in decades. What are we expecting in the coming months, let's say?
Well, first of all, let's call it war. It's war. Why are you saying this is crisis? This is war. This is Russian invasion of Ukraine. We don't know what to expect from Putin. It's very clear that Ukrainians are willing to, and now you are showing this map again and again, wrong map. Guys, is it so difficult for you to
Yes,
remove
maybe
this
they can
wrong
hear you
map.
on the technical room in the gallery room so they can remove the map.
Please,
Yes.
urge them. I'm waiting.
All
I'm
right.
waiting. I hope by the end of our program they will remove this map. Okay, what I was talking. Okay. So Ukrainians are going to continue resistance. That's clear. There's a huge sense of unity and patriotism in Ukraine. More than 120,000 Ukrainian men returned from Europe to defend their country. People are staying in lines to get arms and to join the territorial defense. I am witness of it. So, but we don't know what Russia is facing. Huge losses, huge, really huge. Russian army never suffered such huge losses. So, Russian economy will collapse. Maybe not in a week, but definitely the trend is that it's moving towards collapse. So the question, when Mr. Putin will understand it and will try to reach a ceasefire, but it depends on Putin. It depends also on people who are surrounding him. We don't know. We don't know what is in his crazy mind. He is blackmailing the West, well, actually everybody with the nuclear threats. He is going to employ mercenaries from Syria in Ukraine. Come on, this is so crazy. Mercenaries from Syria. And there are suspicions that he may try to have chemical attack in Ukraine under false pretext, in the same way as he did in Syria. You have the videos of our cities, basically Kharkiv, in Melitopol, Mariupol. They are Russian-speaking cities, but they are turned into Aleppo and Grozny. So when Putin is saying, I'm going to defend Russian speakers, he is actually destroying them, and Russians in Russian, Russians from Ukraine, they are saying in Russian language, Putin, go to hell.
All right. Within the 2 weeks, Europeans have stepped up, welcoming Ukrainian refugees with open arms, in stark contrast to the response to Syrian refugees. Since you mentioned it, a few years ago, Western media has been accused of double standard and hypocrisy in its coverage of the crisis, with many critics pointing out racial bias in the way white refugees were being portrayed vis-a-vis refugee of color. Professor OLEXIY, HARAN, what's your comment on this again?
Well, first of all, listen, let's talk about its own responsibility, okay? So let me, for example, say that we are talking now about Western support. 141 countries in the UN denounced Russia. Only 4 countries supported Russia. 35 abstained. They didn't demand from Russia to stop a war and to withdraw from Ukraine. Among these countries are India. Among these countries is Algeria. I am sorry to say about that. Most Arab countries voted for this. Overwhelming majority of the Arabic countries voted for that. But Algeria abstained. So I do not want now to discuss this, to compare it with
Of course, each country has its diplomatic stance, and we are known to have a moderate stance when it comes to conflicts between neighboring countries.
Can I finish?
Yes.
So one of the major differences is that Ukraine is within Europe. It's part of European civilization. Okay? But further, I'm not going to elaborate it. I would rephrase President Kennedy, who said, don't ask what others did. Be responsible for what you are doing. So I'm drawing attention from those citizens of those countries which didn't support Ukraine. Please do. Finally, you see what's going on.
Yes.
And I believe if you would be able to rebuff Russian aggression in Ukraine, then it would be able, then we would
hope
be
that
able
the situation
also to come
get
back
eased
to
up
Syria
soon
and
and we reach a good resolution. But my point is that should Europeans duplicate this example of solidarity in other refugee crises? Mr. Don McLean GILL, what's your take on this, since European Union was accused of having this double standard when dealing with refugees?
Right. So it's inevitable, of course, that there are other situations that are similar to this around the world. If we look into the humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan, which is happening right now, if we look into other parts of the world, of course, this is not an exclusive situation. But again, one does not justify the other in terms of pointing fingers. And I believe that while there are certain that level of selectivity, of course, in highlighting certain situations, we have to, of course, focus on the issue at hand that we are trying to address now. Of course, media coverage is also considered to be a critical approach to understanding how international politics works. And it is true that there are also, of course, thousands and hundreds of thousands of people who are also losing their lives in other parts of the world in terms of calamities such as this man-made calamities. So that is a point that has already been made. In fact, in terms of media coverage for that matter. But the point now is that we must create a balanced approach in order to facilitate a stable environment in the situation. I would like to add to that, which the professor has also mentioned, of course, stances of abstention from India for that matter. And, it's important to point out that India's abstention is not in support of Russian aggression, rather that it has emphatically and explicitly emphasized that territorial integrity of Ukraine must be adhered, international law must be taken into consideration, and of course that we have to value the stability and integrity of the Ukrainians for that matter. What India provides here through its abstention is that it wants to give diplomatic channels a go. Now we have to understand that there are already sanctions in place. Now if we imagine that we are having no particular environment for negotiation and discussion, the potential could in fact be much worse, considering that on one hand, NATO would not want to get involved in the situation.
I think it's quite clear, because all the countries that have abstained in the voting actually express the same thing. They do want to pave the way for diplomatic channels to do this. Right. But my question is clear. Can we interpret this in racialized terms, Mr. Don McLean GILL? Because we see that, as you said, which brings me to my second question, media's role in shaping the narrative. Does the current coverage help the Ukrainian refugee cause? And what can we do regarding other, let's say, refugee crises?
Right, that's a very valid question and a very important one at that. We have seen the weaponization of information. In fact, there have been issues of disinformation that has been clouding this particular situation in Ukraine. And in fact, we can see the level of danger of promoting narratives that may not have valid interpretations, particularly if we look into both sides. If we talk about mercenaries, for example, both sides blame each other. If we talk about weapons of mass destruction, both sides blame each other. And the problem here is that this is not solving the particular issue with regards to the situation of the people. In fact, this creates more problems. The spread of information and disinformation becomes very problematic for the innocent civilians who are bearing to witness the ambiguity of what could happen in the future. So again, as much as it's easier said than done, a balanced approach in terms of promoting narratives with the situation is absolutely crucial. And without that particular balance, I think it will be absolutely critical to go on with forwarding particular areas for resolution.
Very nice. OLEXIY HARAN, Professor OLEXIY HARAN, the same question: what's the media's role in covering the refugee crisis? What can media do more to give justice to this cause?
Tell the truth and don't spread what Russia's propaganda is saying. Putin was saying that I'm not going to attack Ukraine. It was 2 days before the aggression. Putin was saying that Russians are not using conscripts, and they're using conscripts. Now it's confirmed by Russian general staff, and so on and so forth. You know, when there was World War II, to provide balanced information, it wasn't like, okay, we have information from the UK and we have information from Nazi Germany. So let's present this in a balanced way. So please think about that. Now I am to respond with what my colleague actually said. Listen, when you're talking about mediation of Indians, we have mediation efforts from Turkey, from Israel, from other countries. But they were not afraid to support a very simple resolution: ceasefire and withdrawal of troops. So unfortunately, I am to say that Indian position here and what Indian television was spreading during the first day of the crisis was unacceptable. I was on the first day of aggression on Indian TV, and they said Kyiv is encircled, invasion almost complete, Kabul fell, Kyiv is the next. Now it's what day? 18th? 18th day. Kyiv is not encircled, invasion is not complete, and Kyiv will defend. Now, don't please put. So I frankly think that Indian government cared only about several thousands of Indian students. Well, I understand it, but why don't Indian government care about 100,000 of Ukrainians who are under shelling? Two my daughters evacuated.
Maybe to India's defense, Mr. Don McLean Gill can come back to you on that.
Excuse me, mass destruction. My dear counterpart, do you seriously believe that Ukrainians are going to use chemical weapon or biological weapon, which we don't have, or nuclear weapon? But that's what Russia did. Okay? So don't put responsibility on both sides. And finally, regarding the so-called mercenaries, well, those people who are coming from Europe, from Canada, from India even, from Arabic countries, to help defend Ukraine, they are not mercenaries. Mm-hmm. They are helping the nation to fight the aggressor.
Mr. Don McLean Gill, anything to add on the statements of Professor OLEXIY HARAN?
Please do not put responsibility on both sides.
Okay.
This is totally incorrect from analytical and from academic point of view. Full stop.
That's your opinion, and we understand. Yes, Dr. McLean Gill, please. Anything to comment on what our guest has just said?
I just wanted to comment on one part which the professor has mentioned, of course, and I understand his point of view. And we have to understand that, particularly going back to the situation of WMD for that matter, this does not mean that we are already explicitly saying that either side has that particular intention. It's not putting blame on any particular party, but we have to understand we have to go by the rules-based procedure of investigating such claims. Now, on top of that, for example, we have seen how certain states have accused other states of having particular weapons of mass destruction. We have seen them invade these countries, and then it turned out to be a lack of particular information. And we have seen, for example, the caution that countries have put on China and its possible involvement with the COVID-19 pandemic. The international community wanted to have a thorough, rules-based, transparent investigation, but it did not want to open up to that. And similarly, there have been concerns, particularly since these biological research facilities that were mentioned had particular statements that revolved around the worry that Russian forces may use it, really adds to the component that it is beyond public health and may have particular military use from defense or an offensive point of view. So the need for this is to create a rules-based investigative measurement, which, as we can see, is quite lacking when we look into the situation achieve global security, what happens is that the role of national interest becomes absolutely emphasized, and this is very dangerous. We have seen in the past how allegations that have not been given full investigation based on international law has created particular dangers. So what we're trying to do is we're not trying to promote false information here, but we're trying to maintain the transparency of the situation here. And this would require states to open up to be able to have a collective investigation by the international community. So we have to have it based on the rules-based situation.
Your point is clear, Mr. Don. So now we move on to this info. Russian senior diplomat warned that his country is against the US and NATO military supply to Ukraine and stated that Russian forces will consider their convoys as legitimate targets, announcing that pumping weapons from a number of countries it orchestrates isn't just a dangerous move. Let's follow this report, then we continue our discussion.
A senior Russian diplomat has warned that Moscow could target Western shipments of military equipment to Ukraine amid the fierce fighting which is taking place on Ukrainian borders and around the capital Kyiv. Speaking Saturday, Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov said that Moscow has warned the US that his country would see the deliveries of Western weapons to Ukraine as targets. Ryabkov said Russia warned the US that pumping weapons from a number of countries it orchestrates isn't just a dangerous move. It's an action that makes those convoys legitimate targets for the Russian forces which are advancing towards the capital.
We warned the United States that pumping Ukraine with weapons from a number of countries orchestrated by them is not just a dangerous move, but an action that turns the corresponding convoys into legitimate targets.
Ryabkov also denounced the U.S. sanctions against Moscow as an unprecedented attempt to deal a serious blow to various sectors of the Russian economy, but noted that Moscow will act in a measured way to avoid hurting itself. U.S. President Joe Biden authorized the Secretary of State to provide up to $200 million in defense aid to assist Ukraine. It's not just weapons. The U.S. also to teach Ukrainians how to use them through military education. Russia's 64-kilometer convoy dispersed yesterday, but today it re-emerged in a far more frightening position, just 25 kilometers from the capital Kyiv.
While the US and NATO have rejected Zelensky's repeated calls to implement a no-fly zone over Ukraine, they are shipping weapons into Ukraine at breakneck speed. The US Senate on Thursday approved $6.5 billion for military assistance for Ukraine. For the first time in its history, the European Union is financing the purchase and delivery of arms after leaders agreed to transport weapons worth €450 million to Kiev. Berlin said it will supply 1,000 anti-tank weapons and 500 Stinger missiles in a U-turn from its policy of banning weapon exports to conflict zone. In a similar change of policy, the Norwegian government also said in late February it is donating up to 2,000 M72 anti-tank weapons. In light of all this information, how is this different from a non-fly zone since it's leading the confrontation with the West anyways? Professor OLEXIY HARAN.
I have already responded to that, because the position of NATO actually is very responsible in the sense that they would like to avoid the threat of nuclear war. And on the other hand, regarding supply of arms to Ukraine, Ukraine has the right, according to the UN Charter for Self-Defense. Full stop here. Frankly, I am a little bit confused by I'm lost in all these words said by respectable Don McLean GILL. Can you just tell us, number first, do you condemn Russia's war in Ukraine? Question number one. And second, are Russians killing innocent civilians? Two simple questions. They don't need many words. Please.
Yes, Professor Don McLean, you may answer that.
The first question is that Russia's actions towards Ukrainians and its territorial integrity is not right. It is wrong. And of course, the innocent lives that are being compromised is also wrong. But we have to look into a situation that would not worsen the situation, rather to create an environment that would be able to have stability. Now, we can go one particular path, which is to continue the supply of military weapons, of course, but it also comes with a risk. There would be more innocent people who would die. And we have to understand that this situation would need to have a comprehensive, historically informed, and rational point of view. There's no doubt that killing innocent lives is condemnable, of course, but decision-making in international politics comes with a balance of several other factors, and it could not be simply a yes or no situation. Now, this is what other states have taken into consideration as well. Now, there is obviously a difference in approach, but everyone wants to create a stable environment for the people. And this is, I believe, the most important strategy that we have to take into consideration. There are several styles that are being incorporated now to deal with the situation. So let us just hope that peace prevails for this particular section and that the people would be safe and secure.
And since Russia is actually threatening to target these special military convoys, what could be the outcome of such confrontation? That's my question when Russia targets these convoys for both guests.
Okay, so first of all, you are saying that if the West supplies arms to Ukraine, more civilians would be killed. But now they are killed without supplies of NATO air defense system. And actually, so this is important. If we are weak, Russians would turn all Ukraine into Aleppo. And Mr. Don McLean, GILL, you didn't respond to my two questions. First, is it Russia's war? Just say yes or no. Is it war? Not a conflict, not a special military operation, but this is war. Yes, no. Second question, are Russian soldiers killers of innocent civilians? Two very simple questions.
Yes, Professor Don McLean, you might
I believe
answer
I've
that.
answered that, Professor. In terms of the first question, you asked me if it was condemnable, and I said yes, absolutely condemnable. And second, you asked whether it is
war? Is it war?
Now, that's the third question that you asked, Professor, and the situation now is a war. Because there are obviously two sides that are involved, and it is obviously an armed conflict.
No, excuse me. Is it Russian war against Ukraine? Is it Russia's war against Ukraine?
Well, the situation has to be based. You're an academic as well, Professor, and I'm an academic as well. We have to understand it from a historically informed and rational position.
It's a moral position. Are Russians killing? Just say, are Russians killing innocent Ukrainian civilians? Yes or no?
Innocent people are being killed. And in fact, even an Indian student was killed during the shelling.
One Indian student, yes.
We are aware of the. One was shot.
Repeat?
One was shot as well. I think the answer is pretty clear, Professor. What I'm trying to say.
So say it. This is first. This is Russia's war against Ukraine, and Russian are killers of innocent civilians. Say that.
I suppose that our guest is not required to take any side here, and we're just discussing this problem.
Yes. Immoral, coward
being
position.
In a holistic
to
debate.
put responsibility.
Yes, absolutely.
This is a war between Russia and Ukraine.
Special thanks for you both. Thank you so much for joining our channel. Thank you so much for this interesting insights that you provided both. Our special coverage comes to a close. Thank you for tuning in, and bye for now.